Hey, winner.
Very quickly add to that, the fact that trans students are not included in that study is indicative of how little visibility disabled trans students have in our educational system.
Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think we all have to remember this, like, one big major thing. Remember that we are always going to struggle as long as people who do not belong to the group are in charge of the group. So it just is what it is. Like, as long as people, as long as most of your educators and most of your counselors and most of your whatevers are not the people that are actually using the service, there always is going to be a disconnect, because when other people are charged with working with and making decisions for people, for groups they don't belong to, you're gonna have a gap in and challenges within that department. So if most of your teachers are white teachers without disabilities, then you're always going to in some way struggle a bit with them fully understanding the perspective of children and adults with disabilities of color. As long as your teachers are straight, not all straight, but like straight, not identifying anywhere on the spectrum of queer or anything like that, they're going to struggle maybe with understanding the perspective of LGBTQ and trans people. So, like, as long as the majority doesn't identify with the group that they're supporting, we're going to have a gap. That's just the way it just is that way. You're always going to have a gap in understanding and services when the majority is making decisions for a group that they do not belong to.
And for me, I think that in order to fill some of those gaps, it starts with higher education. You know, our college or education departments, you know, our psychology departments, are they recruiting? You know, are they targeting students with disabilities to get into these fields? Are they supporting students with disabilities to get into these fields? You know, is your university as accessible as possible so that disabled students can graduate, can have the supports and services that they need to become teachers in our schools, so that disabled students and not disabled students can see disability representation in its fullness to really fill in that gap? Because a lot of this, particularly when it comes to education, deals with the lack of representation of folks. You know, what can we do on the higher ed sphere to attract, retain disabled educators and professionals so that our kids can have the representation that they are starving for? You know, because I know I would have benefited from seeing a teacher, particularly a Black woman, in a chair, you know, through my K through 12 experience. That would have been profound for me to have that. So I really think that we have to be intentional about hiring, creating the safe spaces, allowing the accessibility to really thrive so that disabled people can be the representation that we had wish we had when we were young.
As a follow-up to that, intersectionality has been around for quite some time. However, do you feel that it is not prevalent in the curriculum, be it for general ed, special ed, rehab counseling, or counselor education?
So I think it really depends on the curriculum and I think it really depends on the university that you're at and so forth. So I can speak, you know, for the programs here at Vanderbilt, mainly because I teach those classes. So I teach a diversity course that and we hit quite a lot of aspects related to intersectionality in the context of my class, and then I've worked to make sure that we've got that it's not just on me, like because I also feel like it shouldn't be that you take the token like diversity class and feel like you're checking that box, but rather it has, like, we need to be to truly be intersectional in terms of our pedagogy. We need all of you should be learning about diverse populations and disability across all of these curriculums. So if you're if you're, you know, working with clients or you're working through case studies, for example, in your theories of counseling class, are there cases that represent different disability groups, different racial and ethnic groups within those particular courses. So I've worked to really work with my colleagues to try to infuse those types of aspects throughout the curriculum, so that we can try to do better on that.
And I think one thing is you can bring people who have, you know, marginalized identities into your workspace, but what is the work culture for those people to thrive in so that they can be effective in their jobs in which they're hired that goes outside of what they represent, but also ensure that they have the resources and tools to support, you know, their students or their clients in these roles, because they're going to carry that burden, you know, similar to what was just said, you know, of being that quote unquote token, of being that face. How are they going to be supported in not only fulfilling such a tremendous role for those in which they come in contact with, but also for themselves? Because for some people that can be very overwhelming to be the only or a handful. So just thinking about how can you not only recruit and retain, but also sustain so that people don't feel burnt out, so people don't feel like they are tokenized. You know, really diving into the racist, white supremacist, you know, ableist, homophobic, transphobic cultures of the spaces that we work in, and really doing the work so that it's not just on the backs of those marginalized persons who are filling in such a tremendous gap that is needed. This is an effort, a collective effort, not just for those individuals, but everyone within those institutions, because it cannot be on them to make the change within systems that were already either corrupt or, you know, just not ill prepared to really be what it should be before they came along. So really being realistic about what can somebody do in this space that does not make them feel like they're hitting a wall, or that they feel like they are tokenized, or just not really being able to be who they need to be and really get the results that they want to have for themselves and for those that they're serving.
Okay.
I want to address a question that I just saw. Someone said, do you think that white heterosexual able-bodied females can make good counselors or males? I don't want you to hear us say that we think that all white people can't advocate for anybody other than white people, because that is not my intention. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that white people that are not disabled or not gay or whatever can't advocate for people well. What I'm saying is there's always going to be a gap when you have people who don't represent the culture that they're serving. That does not mean you can't educate yourself. That does not mean you can't be a good advocate. That does not mean you can't be a good ally. It does mean you have to be careful. It does mean that you have to try to not do those, you know, it does mean that we don't want to become a room full of saviors where we're like, I know what's best for you and I can help you figure out how to get through this. I have a lot of wonderful people in my life who are not people of color and who are not people with disabilities that have supported and nurtured and helped me grow and move forward and be able to do all the things that I've been able to do. But they also have put some effort into really learning about what was needed and what was being asked of them, and not just making assumptions based on an outside perspective. So I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that white people are not capable of being wonderful allies and wonderful supporters and wonderful people to support people that are in a marginalized group. Because I'm going to be very honest, you're the majority. So until white people care about it, it isn't really going to change anyway, because that's just kind of the history of the country, right? Like until a bunch of white people got together and said, you know what, we probably should stop owning people. Black people never wanted to be owned, and we always were like, we don't want to do this. But until white people decided that it was not okay too, that's when it changed. Every big movement that changes happens on the back of the group that is in the middle of it, but the decision makers are usually old white men. So until old white men and older white women decide, you're right, we got to do something different, it isn't going to change. So we need you. We need your advocacy. We need your allyship, because without it, we know that the greater change may not happen, because we are not the majority. It's just a simple numbers game. So we need you on the right side of history on every issue. So don't feel like because you're white, don't have white guilt and be like, well, I'm white and I'm a woman and I'm straight, so I can't possibly be helpful. You can absolutely be helpful, but you have to be careful, and you have to be honest about where you're coming from, and you have to be honest about what your goal is, and you have to be able to be aware to hear criticism and go, that's not it. Let's try again from another perspective. But we need you, and you need us to help us continue to grow and make louder voices. We need you, and you need us to kind of help keep everybody in the same perspective. So nothing about us without us. Isn't that what Dr. Deborah said? Nothing about us without us, and that'll keep everybody happy.
Well, I do want to address one thing when people say statements like that, because for me, it comes across as a bit of a defensive mechanism, saying, well, I check all these boxes, I cannot represent or cannot be enough for this group of people. And for me, as a professional, you got to check your ego at the door when it comes to that. Now, you are there to do a job. You are there to understand that there's going to be limits to how much of a reach you can have. It is not for your clients, not for your colleagues, not for anyone to collar your feelings about not feeling good enough that you cannot do this job because you fit pretty much every majority privileged box. It is your job to understand that, yes, you check these boxes, but how can you be someone who is not doing harm? How can you use your position of privilege to check your colleagues, to check administrators, particularly as a white person in these spaces? You have such a tremendous privilege that many of you are not utilizing, that creates harm, not for just your students or your clients, but also your colleagues as well. So I'm really not here for white people wondering about, oh, I can't be good enough. And I know that may be a little controversial to say here, but I'm not here for that, because white people, you make the majority of these fields. I know with social work, white women make the majority of my profession. I'm not here for anybody in a helping profession wanting their hand held, because we're telling you that, hey, we need more people that look like us in this field. We need more people that look like you to step aside. That's not the conversation we need to have today. If you are getting in your feelings about that, that is fine. Because I know this is for some of you, this is the first time you're hearing these conversations. And I know it may be rattling, but those are your feelings to work through. What we're doing today is providing you some of a script for you to really get to where you need to be as professionals, to really provide supports and services for your clients who are disabled, particularly those who hold multiple identities. So white people, you really have to check yourselves in your feelings. Understand that you make the dominant of these fields, and people of color, LGBTQ folks, and those who have both of these identities need more of us in these spaces. We need to be given the space to talk about the inequalities that our students and people in our community are experiencing. And it's not saying that all white people are bad. It's saying that whiteness is a problem in some of this work that we're trying to do, and some of the issues that we're trying to eradicate. And that you as a white person, that's your job to understand what this looks like. That's your job to understand how you, with your presence alone, can unintentionally look like the problem, and how you, with the work that needs to be done, can help to show that you are an ally, co-conspirator to what we're trying to create, which is a restructuring of the world that has deemed disabled people and those of us who have marginalized identities as inferior, as not being deserving of receiving supportive services, of not receiving a quality education, whether K through 12 or higher education. You have to be knowledgeable of that. And you have to understand where we're coming from and wanting these systems to change. And that will mean white folks may have to step aside. White folks will have to get up on the ball with the way that the system has ran for you all, and how it ran for white disabled people too, because that's something we haven't talked about here. How white disabled people fare better than people of color. So really understanding that when we talk about intersectionality and oppression, there are going to be some hard feelings in these conversations, and that's okay. But it is not on anybody on this panel who is not white to really say, to do some hand holding here. And I know I'm a little emotional about that, but it really grinds my gears when white people pose questions like that. because it's such a defensive mechanism, whether you realize it or not. You're white. The world operates through whiteness. And it's okay to understand that. That doesn't make you bad. That's just the system we live in.
Okay, I am going to make a moderator's decision here. We have several more questions. So what I'm going to do is I am going to fast forward between from our next questions about what does disability justice mean to you and what does a disability justice movement look like for you, to a question that is extremely timely. And this question asks, how would you describe disability justice, including people with disabilities, being deprioritized in the current medical crisis during this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so I think ableism is really especially problematic during crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, because there's a really real danger that disabled individuals like myself would be denied necessary or life-saving care due to the assumption and presumption that my condition makes me somehow less worthy of intervention. So there's this notion of, well, they likely won't survive this virus if infected, so why waste precious resources on them? This gets further complicated by this growing evidence that Black and Latino communities are disproportionately affected specifically by COVID-19, and as we've been talking about here today, are also disproportionately affected by ableist policies. But we are also the ones that are in most danger of this discourse and of being really targeted through these eugenic based policies. The other flip side of this too is that Black, Indigenous, Latinx individuals are also considered essential workers and live in conditions that are affected by environmental injustice and are more likely to be incarcerated and are therefore dying more from COVID at higher rates. But we're viewed as being expendable. I want to also use this as a chance to amplify the brief name and story of Liliana Jordan. So she is an individual who died of COVID-19 with cerebral palsy, and was a grocery store worker. And again, furthering this inequity even more, her parents and family members reported that her final paycheck made it to them, and it was for $20.64. And so this is how, to me, this is how these issues are connected.
Right now, we're all up against a deadly virus, but a lot of disabled people are also up against this. People who believe sentiments like this sacrifice the weak. It is not an uncommon thing for people to say, and it is not a new idea, but a very old fascist idea whose prevalence in current society is being laid bare by the economic crisis this virus is causing. And it works its way up to the highest levels of the state. The idea that the economy is more important than the lives of immunodeficient people or anybody else particularly vulnerable to the disease. And what disability justice looks like at a time like this can be photographing, screenshotting, documenting people like this, getting them into the hands of people who will be able to track and identify them and dox them and expose them so that they will face justice on a community level that they never will from the state. And it also means standing up against these ideas everywhere you see and everywhere you hear them, and never tolerating eugenics thought.
I'm very concerned as a person with a disability, but also a person who works with people with disabilities primary, and that's my job every day, all day. I work with adults and children with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And, you know, our state program that runs what we do are all very concerned and very scared about, like, you know, how do we, that population of folks is a congregated population. They tend to live in houses with groups of 3 with staff that come in and out. They tend to go to day programs with groups of each other. There's a lot of, you know, sometimes bodily fluids that just are kind of going around, much like in schools and such. So as Winter was saying, it's a scary population to belong to when you know that there are going to be people that are like, well, you know, and Angela said this as well, there are going to be people that are going to go, well, I mean, you know, what really are you contributing to the world anyway? If I can save this for a person who I feel like has more abilities to make a difference in this world, then that's what I'm going to save this ventilator, this antibiotic, or whatever. I mean, you don't treat viruses with antibiotics, but you know what I mean? Like, and a lot of our population have secondary issues, right? You know, we've got a lot of folks with disabilities that it's not just that they have one arm or one leg, it's that they also have asthma, or they have one arm and one leg and also are diabetic, or they have one arm or they have cerebral palsy and they also get pneumonia 5 times a year. So that's a really scary time to be in right now. I never would have, you know, in my lifetime, I haven't ever had to just stay home all day, every day, and only go on drives and go on walks in my neighborhood. I never would have really thought I would be wearing a mask in the grocery store and things like that, and wouldn't have necessarily even considered myself as high risk for being sick, because I'm like, oh, I'm healthy, I'm fine. But, you know, well, my lungs don't quite work like everybody else's do sometimes, so I've got to be more careful. And it is scary to think that I could be lying in an emergency room bed and they look at me physically and think, she can be spared. We can let this one go. And they're basing that decision on disability, and they're also basing it on color, and they're also basing it on gender. That's scary to know that, you know, that's one of the moments where checking all the boxes that I can check is not nearly as beneficial as it is when I'm just applying for a job.
And I would like to add that just because, particularly in our news cycles, disability is not shared explicitly doesn't mean that disability is not a part of the conversation when it comes to coronavirus. You know, when we talk about pre-existing conditions or people having high blood pressure or heart disease, those are disabilities. Those are chronic illnesses. So even though disability is not explicitly said, disability is a part of this narrative. And we especially need to be mindful of not having that type of understanding, because saying disability is a legal thing, you know, and we know how, you know, certain, when it comes to legality of disability, how that can work. So understanding that when we talk about coronavirus and disability and who's being impacted, that disability narrative is so present that we cannot ignore it just because disability is not explicitly said. So I really want us to be very conscious of that, of how we understand the framing of who has the virus, who's at risk for it, who's dying from it, and the way that the news media will spin it to not really connect race and disability, or disability being a part of a huge component of this pandemic.
Do we have any other responses to that question? We have approximately 4 minutes remaining. And what I would like for the panelists to do in this remaining time is to identify at least one key strategy you want the attendees to take away to become better allies in their community.
Be a good listener. Be a good listener. That's my one key strategy. Be a good listener. Be aware of what's going on around you. Be aware of with whom you are talking to. Be aware that if a person comes in with another person to help them, that make sure you're talking to the person with the disability and not only talking to their helpers. Be a good listener. Just listen to the room, listen to the conversation, listen to the experience. listen to their fears, listen to their successes, listen to what they really want to do, and listen to hear if they don't really want to do anything. Just be a good listener. I think we all do better in life, and we all feel like we are heard much more when we are just listening and we are listened to.
To be in,
I think we've talked about a lot of different things here today, and I think that one that has kind of come up more inadvertently is don't expect credit for being an ally. And so I would just say, to be a true ally, you're not doing it for the gold star, you're not doing it for the pat on the back, you're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
To be an ally of the disability justice movement, you need to understand that the history of this movement is one of direct action. It is people crawling up the Capitol steps. It is people in wheelchairs chaining themselves to lawmakers' offices. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when we take public action today, we experience a lot of peace policing and people telling us that using direct action tactics is wrong because of these ideas of civility that they want to force onto our movement. So I would say to all non-disabled people who want to be our ally, don't put out these false equivalence ideas about violence or anything like that. Let disabled people take charge of the disability justice movement and let us do what we need to do in these desperate times.
I would say assess how you view disability and disabled people that goes beyond your professional parameters. I think that's very key. Going into that maybe implicit bias, just really understanding of how do you view disability before you got into these roles. What do you think about disabled people? Are you comfortable around disabled people that are not your clients? Assessing your privilege, assessing that discomfort, assessing, how you feel about moving aside, assessing using your own privileges, particularly as a white person. How comfortable are you to advocate for people who don't look like you, and putting yourself, on the line, whether it's your job, whether it's your voice, how do you do that? Are you comfortable with doing that? And really doing that true assessment that may not feel good, but it is needed so that you are aware of where you are at this time and where you need to be.
Have we heard from everyone on at least their one strategy? And at this time, I will invite any final comments as we wrap up from the panel, or if there are any pressing questions that the participants would like to have answered. We have approximately 1 minute.
I want to say I'm honored to be on this panel full of such powerful women and such inspiring advocates. And when I hear all of you talk, it really makes me feel like that the leaders of the disability justice movement are going to take us where we need to go. And also, there were a lot of really good questions we didn't get to answer, and if possible, I'd like to stick around and try to answer some of them, at least in text.
I would just like to say I am very excited to be on a panel where I am not the only Black person. That was
Amen.
Yay!
And I'm so glad to meet all of you.
Your numbers.
Thank you. Everybody made such great points, and this has been an incredible time. So I'm so glad to know new faces now.
Thank you again to all of our panelists and all of our participants. And we will leave the link open if you want to continue having some discussions, even if it's through chat. Dr. Shepherd-Jones, are you still with us?
I am. This has been quite an afternoon. I think we made the right decision to continue with this seminar today, and I am so delighted with the moderation and all of you panelists who have shared of your time and your expertise. The sun is coming out here in Nicholasville, Kentucky. I hope it is where you all are as well. And we need to, I think, consider ways where we can build upon this and continue the dialogue moving forward. But thank you all very, very much. And for all of our participants, please remember to complete the evaluations when you receive it so we can continue to offer powerful programs like this in the future. Have a good weekend.
Thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you guys so much. And yeah, Winter, like you said, if you'd like to continue to discuss or answer any of the questions that remain open in the Q&A, please feel free.
I don't really do anything all day, so anyone who wants to stick around, I'll try and get to the questions that we didn't have time for. There were a lot of good ones.
I have to jump off of here. I have to run to my next activity, and by run I mean walk slowly because I don't run. It's not my thing. So I will. It was so wonderful to see and be a part of this with all of you. But I'm gonna have to run because we've got to go pick up a car that is being worked on. But thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to working with all of you again.
Thank you too, Chastity. It was great to see you.
You too.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to hop off and get some work done because it's Friday and I don't want to do anything on the weekend. So thank you all for having me. And my social media is everywhere for anybody that's remaining. And you can reach out to me. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.